let him drink for a day, and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. Has that happened to anybody? Okay. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. We hear tragedies of people that have custody hearings or something, and they need a little fortification, and then they take a drink, and then they can't stop, and they show up plowed or don't show up at all, and they lose their chance. Right? Okay, so we've roughly identified the real alcoholic. So I'm going to jump over to, I think what I want to do next is jump from there to page 25, just briefly, the very first paragraph where it says there is a solution. And the solution, I want people to understand that there's a difference. They describe the process and the solution. The solution is what's revealed to us in the process. It's not the process itself, but they differentiate it. And a lot of people, that's why people talk about how it works rather than who does the work in our rooms. But who is the reason that we do this. The how reveals the who. Okay? Okay, so there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching and the leveling of our pride, the confession of our shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. So what is the consummation of the process? An awakened state. Awakened to who I am and whose I am, that I might bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, thy way of life. Yep? Okay. So then it goes on to say, but we saw it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We've found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. How many of you want to be rocketed? Everybody wants to be rocketed. Don't even know what it looks like. We just want to go. Okay. Okay, let's go to chapter 3, more about alcoholism. Do something a little different for a change. So it says most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. So how many of you battled with it, whether it was a matter of will or, and some of us declared we were alcoholic but didn't understand the gravity of it. Of course I do this. I'm an alcoholic. Right? So, but what we're just, that's why they say most of us. And they're also talking about an inner struggle. How many of you knew something was desperately wrong, but you were hoping no one noticed? Okay. So it says, no person likes to think he's bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Don't get it twisted. All of us like to think we're bodily and mentally different in good ways. We don't like to think we're bodily and mentally different in other ways. So when it tells me something that I feel like I need to live, it's not safe for me to do, I don't want to believe that. No. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So it says, therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. So how many of you have made a few attempts to prove you could drink or use like a normal person, whatever that looks like? I mean, we are bad judges of what normalcy looks like in general. So if we're with them so far, then we're with them. The idea that somehow he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. So I ask you, if you do not believe yourself to be an abnormal drinker, did you find that controlling and enjoying were mutually exclusive? Yeah. Because they did that for a reason. I could enjoy, no control. And times I could control, no joy. So we're looking for that. How many of you looked for that happy medium? Added a few new chemicals. Chemical test pilot, right, Lane? I'm sure we can plane out with just a little nudge. Yeah. Okay. So the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. Now, the thing about control is they're telling you what you're really addicted to, and the substance you're ingesting is really a symptom. Which is why I've got to get rid of that control addiction or I'm going to suffer, right? So they expected people to be sober by the time they read this book. So now take the alcohol out, the idea that he can control and enjoy his thinking is a great obsession of every abnormal thinker. We can control our thinking by blocking consciousness or turning our thoughts to others, but we may not enjoy it, or we may enjoy it and we run amok. Okay? All right. So the next thing I like people to look at, because for years we walked into rooms that had the steps on the wall, and people didn't know that there were steps to take, and if you take those steps off the wall, you probably got an off-the-wall program. Right? So it says, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. Now, if you ask most people in modern fellowships what the first step in recovery is, what are they going to tell you? Powerless and unmanageable. But that's the confession. That's not the experience. So it doesn't matter how many times I confess until I believe in my heart, it ain't happening. Does that make sense? Some of you that study that other book, you'll know that that's also true. Yes? Confess with your mouth and believe in your heart. Okay. Cannot fully concede to your innermost self based on a lie, folks. Doesn't matter what your religious training is. You can't do it, right? Okay. So this is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we're like other people or presently maybe have to be smashed. The interesting thing about delusions and our thought that we should smash our own delusions is that delusional people do not know they're delusional.
It's a problem.
So you do not know the delusions from which you suffer, so you therefore cannot smash your own. But an active life of service trying to help others will smash your delusions, your old ideas, introduce you to the power of serving, all those things. Which is why we'd want to go through the process, awaken and serve, yes? Okay, so I want to go from there over to Bill's story, so that's going backwards, because I don't think anybody tells the story much better than Bill, and I want to go to page 5, I believe. And we'll run through his experience as quickly as we can, because I spent more time in some of the other stuff tonight. But he's now going to talk about the crossing over. He was a drinker, and it got increasingly worse, and then he started going to treatment. Some of you relate to him. And now we're going to catch him where he's been going to treatments and nothing's working. And he comes in and he says, liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. Now, he not only says that, he describes it for him. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, often 3, got to be routine. So did you realize that quantities you used to think ridiculous now became necessary stock? Yes. Okay. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I'd pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning shaking violently. How many of you have had that experience? How many of you discovered that another nudge helped with the shaking violently part? We call it staying ahead of the curve. Okay, so you're going to talk about that. A tumbler full of gin followed by a half dozen bottles of beer would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. Now he's describing the nature of the insanity. I wake up every morning shaking violently, have to have another drink of what poisoned me just to be functional to the extent functional really is anymore, so I can run out and pay the people I've been borrowing from so I can get on the hook to them again. But I got this shit. I got a plan. Anyone? Okay. So there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. Gradually, things got worse. So that's what it looks like from a delusional mind. People living with us don't see it quite so gradual. How many of you have had someone in active addiction with you since you've sobered up? Does it look pretty messy? So what they see and what I see from my adult state are not the same, but he describes it for us so we can get a sense of what it looks like, right? All right, so the house was taken over by the mortgage holder. Any of you get eviction notices or? Okay. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at a low point of 1932, and I'd somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits, and then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. So he's talking about how we're characterized by taking a drink at exactly the wrong moment. He went out to celebrate his good fortune, and then he didn't show up to collect his good fortune. Any of you ever done that? So did it shock you? Like, did you wake up? This has to be stopped? Because Bill said, I woke up. This had to be stopped. None of you had something really go bad, and you thought, man, I'm going to do that anymore, and then did it some more? Okay. This had to be stopped. I saw that I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Any of you get to that point in your active addiction? How'd that go? Did you really mean it? You were pretty sure you meant it, huh? So he says, before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. You could tell I meant it because I told somebody else. I had an accountability partner. Oh, some of you had that one too? Cool. Well, very good. So shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? So when they put a question mark, he's showing you he's starting to look inward. He's starting to question himself, which is the first step towards a first step. Experience is starting, instead of looking out, look in. Right? All right, so I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way, and I had taken it. Was I crazy? How many of you got to the point where you started questioning your own sanity? Maybe you thinking about killing yourself. Maybe all those, okay. So it says, I began to wonder for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. So now he's telling you what alcoholic insanity is. It's not doing the same thing, expecting different results. If it were, they would have written it down. If you're alcoholic enough, you do the same thing with no expectation of a different result. But it is an appalling lack of perspective, knowing what's going to happen to me when I do it. It may not happen every time, but every time something really shitty happens, I just happen to have been inebriated. Yeah? Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. So that experience, in fancy words, is I confused the experience of grace with the illusion of control.
I got this.
Yep, exactly. I got my chip. Proof of purchase. Said I could laugh at the Gen Mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar asking myself how it had happened. How many of you casually walked into a drink or a drug, weren't looking for it, but when it showed up, by golly, I will. So after you found yourself with some in your system, then what happened? Oh, this was a really bad idea, but I might as well get high now. No sense in wasting good high time. Let's rock it into a fourth dimension. So what he says is, as the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I'd manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. So he's showing you the delusion of control. Once he put it in his body, he didn't have any choice. He was going to do that. Get on the building, jump off. Halfway down, say, I choose to hit the ground. See if it makes you feel better. But the choice was made with an insane mind before I took the drink, not after. That's why they call it the insanity of the first drink, and he's trying to show us that in his story. Okay? So the insanity is characterized by that bizarre behavior, but that's not what caused it. It's just a manifestation. It's a symptom of that. Okay. All right. So I I always do this. Okay, I'm on 6 again. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. So do yourself a favor, have a first step experience. How many of you used again after you knew it wasn't safe? Maybe not, maybe you've been sober the whole time you've been in recovery, but used again after you knew it wasn't safe. When you woke up the next morning, can you bring to consciousness that remorse, horror, hopelessness? Yes. How many of you had those, you've never used again, but you had those drunk dreams? Yeah. And you woke up, God, I wonder who saw. I don't know. Anyone know what I'm talking about? How am I going to tell them? I'm not going to tell them. How am I going to tell them? Fuck them. Right? Remorse, horror, hopelessness, right? So we all know that. We can bring it to consciousness. They say we all can. If we're this person, we all can because it's unforgettable. We cannot bring to consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. But all of us can remember the remorse, horror, and hopelessness after we've reactivated our addiction because it is unforgettable. Okay. All right. So the courage to do battle was not there. So now he's describing what happens to us as a result. I don't deserve this. I screwed up again. What the hell? Anybody? How many of you went back to the fellowship and felt diminished in the fellowship? How many of you were afraid that would happen so you just didn't bother going back? Those types of things happen. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dare cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me that the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. So he knew the world would go on without him, and he was pretty convinced most of his life that the world wouldn't go on without him, but now he knew. Right? How many of you came into the vision of your own mortality at some point in your addiction and found that difficult to take? Okay. So he says that was a hard thought. It is, isn't it? Should I kill myself? No, not now. I'll do it on the installment plan, right? Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. How many of you did that? Man, let's not kill ourselves today. Let's have a drink. I'll feel better. I'll feel better soon. Next month, perhaps. So 2 bottles in oblivion, right? He says, the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. How many of you did that? Maybe you didn't have a wife, but just stole something from somebody where there would be no earthly explanation. There you go. There you go. Did you tell them the truth about where it went? That's another powerlessness, right? We'll lie to them, and they'll know we're lying, and we'll know they know we're lying, and we are riding this motherfucker out. That's powerlessness. Ain't copping to shit. Okay. All right. So again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. And then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish I feared I would burst through my window sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to the lower floor lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. How many of you at some point in your addiction started pursuing other? Any of you learned that really alcoholism was nothing more than a Valium deficiency? And found some willing participants in that? So next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. Did any of you cross over in that way? Solve your alcohol problem with a methamphetamine solution? Or whatever, right? Okay, so people feared for my sanity, and so did I. So now they are afraid of it, and I'm starting to think they might be right. Okay. I could eat little or nothing when drinking. I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. And it would be nationally known at that time because it wasn't a disease. It was weird. It was set up for veterans and such more than anything else, right? Towns Hospital in New York. Yeah, Dr. Bob hadn't been encountered yet. So this is Silkworth. So then he says, best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I'd been seriously ill bodily and mentally. So the component for Bill that started to make a difference was to learning that he didn't drink because he was bad. He drank because he was sick, and then he had some manifestations of self that obviously needed to be tended to. Makes sense? So it allowed him to sort of consider seeking a healing. Here he is, okay? It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor. So what does that mean, the will is amazingly weakened coming to combat liquor?
I can do other things great, but I just can't stop drinking.
And seemingly drawn to what I know will kill me if I do it again. Right? My will is amazingly weakened in combating it because the fight's in my mind. I don't have an expectation of it turning out different after a while. I know it's not going to turn out different. I just believe the current moment too painful to go on, and I know what'll happen the minute I get there. In fact, the minute I give myself permission to go get it, I start feeling better. Right? Where's my opiate addicts? Really dope sick, and then you find out someone's got a script. I'm going to make it. That's problematic. Yeah. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. So he finally gave himself permission to accept help because his incredible behavior was explained to him in a way he could absorb it. Right. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. How many of you got some self-understanding and went out a brand new man or woman? Okay, well, then what happened? Because we still haven't encountered power greater than ourselves. We've just encountered some human understanding. Oh, I'm sick. What's my medicine? What will happen if I take 2? For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. So what are they talking about?
Successful.
Yeah, things are looking up. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. So they're talking about all of our experience, and we come to a fellowship and people start making suggestions, and we know ourselves better, and we're going to be meeting makers making it. But it was not. And this is what happens if we're not meeting makers who make it, because we're the vast majority and we don't talk much about them. Right? But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. So how many of you had that experience? Not going off a ski jump, but when you used again, things got bad quick. Like, I knew it was going to be bad, but whew. Long way down. Okay. After a time, I returned to the hospital. So he's been there 3 times. Now he's drank himself to a 4th. And now that's where we get to him. I'm going to jump because we're going to run out of time. I'm going to jump over to his encounter with Ebby because that's all we're going to get done tonight. So we got through our powerless and unmanageability, and now we're going to take a look at page 9. And picture the person in your addiction that no matter how bad you got, this is the one man or woman who at least you weren't that bad yet. Got that picture? Okay, so that's who Ebby is for Bill, and Bill's going to describe the encounter of Ebby coming to see him sober. So it says, my musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked me if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. So it was really amazing to him because Ebby, nobody's as bad as Ebby, right? As bad as it got, I wasn't that damn bad, right? Look at Ebby. So I was amazed. Rumor had it that he'd been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. It was inconceivable that he could be there because he'd been committed, and he must have escaped because who'd have let that crazy bastard out, right? Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him, unmindful of his welfare. I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility, the very thing an oasis. Drinkers are like that. Think about what they're saying there. What is an oasis oftentimes in the desert?
The great relief.
It might be water, and it might have you drinking sand. But even if 99 times it's sand, if I'm a drinker, we're going to drink that sand until it becomes water. Because drinkers are like that. Even if it might happen, we're going to pop off. Right? All right. So he describes him walking in. The door opened, and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. Guys, that's a weird way to describe your drinking buddy. So something really weird has happened when you're describing your drinking buddy as fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different what had happened. So he knew something had happened. What he didn't know then that he discovered through the process is he had encountered the presence of God when he opened the door. And then he says, I pushed a drink across the table, and he refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the fellow. He wasn't himself. So how many of you have been disappointed but curious? Okay, so you're not going to use with me, you're not going to drink with me? Oh, well, more for me. That's where he's at. So now I got to ask, come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion. Now, regardless of your religious leanings, let's admit it. You're drunk and drinking. You think it's going to be a party. You invite the cat in. He's inexplicably different. He won't take a drink. And when you ask him what happened, he said, I've got religion. The fun meter goes, right? That's going to be a fucking lecture. Sure glad I got plenty of gin. Okay. I was aghast, so that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. Now that's cool, but then the cat doesn't act like he expects, and that's when he's gripped by the power. Folks, I'm going to call to your attention because we got to land the plane. We're not going to get to go as far as we would sometimes go. But from the encounter, that's what I was like, which I won't learn until I go through the steps. But what happened is that encounter. I walked into someone I knew to be hopeless, and they not only were sober, but they were coherent, and they'd come there for me, and they told me. He did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. So he's talking about what happened to him. Although he remained all his life a doubter, he always declared this encounter. He encountered the power of the living God in the person of his friend, and his friend said, we've got a religious idea. God dwells in you, and a practical program of action that will prove that power to you through you if you will be a doer of the steps, not a reader. Does that make sense? So that's step one, and next week we'll look at the encounter in depth. Thanks.